I'm here with my
Oh, I'm on that side.
Yeah.
Okay.
What? You're leaving?
I have to go. I'll say hi.
You
What do you
barely
want
said
me to
hello.
do?
I don't know. I want you to sit here and say hello. You're my co-host on the live stream for about 2 seconds. There she is.
Look at my bow. My bow. What? It says, in October we wear pink because it's like breast cancer awareness.
Yeah.
And my shoelaces. Hold on. My socks and shoelaces are pink too. Okay, I have to go, but I love you.
Okay. I love you, honey. I'll talk to you. Tell go text me and tell me. Make sure that you have a ride home. You need to tell me if I need to come pick you up.
Bye, live stream.
Bye, live stream, she says. Hi there. So it's a little bit of a hubbub. I'm here with, oh, I almost called you Fairy Council. Princess Squirrely Girl. So today they tell me is going to be an energetic transmission that's somewhat different from that which I normally emit. I normally emit one anyway. So I've got a ton of information to deliver. And recently I've been getting downloads about that. And today, kind of to my chagrin, they want me to start talking about, I thought it was going to be all technical information because I've got a lot of technical information to deliver about different kinds of energetic blocks. I mentioned that the last live stream. We're going to be talking about different kinds of energetic blocks, timelines, moving up into strata. I took a ton of notes, and all of this information needs to come through and be delivered. So that's what I thought it was going to be about. But today they said, no, you need to start talking about certain things about, how do I even say that? Personal memories having to do with the Joan of Arc lifetime, but that happened in this life. And I don't really know why it's that important. Though they say practical information, because apparently my experiences are, things like that are going to be happening to more and more people. So they say couch it in the, hi. Okay, wait, what is that? Does that mean I have to take you? Okay. All right, I guess that's that. Okay, so I'm going to put her down first. I'm putting her down for 1 second. I'll pick you up again in a minute, Princess Squirrely Girl. There's a lot about, it suddenly got very hot in here, and that's how you know the energy is running, right? It was one temperature, and now I'm swaying too. So it's definitely coming through. There's something about the has to do with synchronicity, the way that is orchestrated, the mechanism by which synchronicity occurs. Not all of the information is going to come through today, but for some reason it was one particular story, one or two particular stories. Whew, hot in here. Suddenly got very hot. All right. So do you know, if you don't know this already, after I do a live stream on here, I usually transfer it to YouTube. If you find my live streams long and rambling, you can watch them on YouTube on my channel, The Ascension Arc, and on that venue, you can speed them up, basically. My nose is running too. Okay, it'll start in a minute, just a second. Only ever happens when I'm on a live stream. The energy runs and so does my nose. So a couple of short things. Hang on a minute. They're orchestrating, reorganizing some things behind my head. When it comes through, it's really going to come through. So if you could bear with me a second. Okay, I'm going to start here. There are some things that I talked to Maria Therese about this recently. There are a lot of things that have that we know are going to be coming in, that are programmed in the timelines already. And we've been waiting for certain other elements to catch up. You know, the other day I said how there's a very distinct divide between now, recently. There's a much more distinct divide between the population that is definitely moving to 5. It's kind of a staggered population. Like there's some people who are still working through a lot of density. So they're not really with us yet, but they've made the decision and it's just a matter of time before they get there. And then there's also another whole group of people that I started to talk about last time that have made the decision on a soul level that they're not ready. And some of them are kind of surprising because it's not that they're bad people, it's that it's just that they're not ready to step really into sovereignty. They're still, there's a certain level of responsibility. I have talked about this before. Your level of responsibility, your level of stewardship and responsibility for being the caretaker of others, your level of service work absolutely goes up with your level of sovereignty. Sovereignty doesn't mean, a lot is made of sovereignty. The term is kind of thrown around a lot on Facebook, I've noticed. But it doesn't just mean that you are your own being, and that's kind of like a kind of bastardized idea of individuation. Yes, it has that aspect to it, but it also means that if you are if you are sovereign and you are the king or the queen, that means you're the ruler of a kingdom and you are the caregiver. You're the caretaker of kind of the extent of your kingdom. So not everyone is ready to do that. So if you're someone who likes to think of themselves as a nice person, but will consistently pass a homeless person, or will views caring for others as a burden, why don't they do it themselves? They're not my responsibility. Everything that comes into your field is there for a reason. And it's a choice that you make. And you vote with your energetic signature. Remember I was talking about your energy. Everyone is their own unique recipe of frequencies. You have an energetic signature that is yours and yours alone. And all of the energy that passes through you, every single action that you take, is accruing in one place or another. You're either pointing yourself up, or you're pointing yourself towards self, service toward others or service toward self. You're either a subject or you're a sovereign being. There are different levels of responsibility. And sometimes we think that there's the kind of the tendency to think that that these choice points are obvious. But really, you have already voted with every single action you've taken. You've put your energetic signature on and basically already voted in terms of what you want your world to look like when that portion of the spectrum comes around and it's your turn. It's like the wheel is going to turn. In the third dimension, this is where karma exists, in the third dimension. It's kind of a clumsy example because it's extreme, but if you see a homeless person and you pass them by, or you don't look at them, you ignore them, you decide that even though you've got more and you're perhaps healthier, you probably have more money, you're definitely better off, you decide that your time is also more important and you're not going to give that person any time, any money, any attention, any care. You're saying, with your own personal energetic signature, this is okay with me. This is what I want in my world. This is okay in the world. It doesn't matter to me. This gets my vote. This degree of discrepancy is what I'm saying yes to. You already voted every time you ignored that person. So if you give that person $1 and say, have a nice day, and then continue on your way, you've put your energetic signature and said, this is how much care this person warrants in my world. So at some point, as long as you're in the third dimension, at some point, that's going to be your position. And the way you're treated, it's going to, you with your energetic signature, you're going to call in exactly the results you voted for. So if you get $1, it's because that was the extent that you gave at that time. You need to think about it, because sometimes we think that these choice points are going to be very obvious, like how do you want to be treated? To what degree are you invested in the care of another? To what degree are you invested in compassion? So the interesting thing is that these imbalances accrue over a long period of time. And the experience of being in the third dimension, where's my diagram, is the experience of individuation. The third dimension will, without awareness, is one where you have a physical experience, but you have the experience of separation, usually, until you become more aware and you realize that I'm in a body, but I'm also witnessing other aspects of myself, and all is one. If you really understand, have the true knowledge that all is one and there's really only one of us here, you would be as generous with the homeless person as you can possibly be. The same way you would if you think about it in terms of balance. You would never have 2 legs and just walk on one of them. Yeah, I only identify with this leg, so I'm just going to constantly put make this one really strong, and the other leg can go fuck itself. It's not my problem. Some organization should probably take care of that one. No, that's also you. And if it comes into your awareness, it's there for a reason. It's there to show you, to give you a sacred choice point. So where was I going with this? Imbalances, they accrue over a long period of time. At some point, I'm going to wind up talking about imbalances in countries, cultures. It's the same thing that happens all the time. it will happen over and over and over again. And the reason it happens over, like a French Revolution and an American Revolution, and any of these great imbalances that end up in a catastrophe because of imbalance, that happens because the small imbalances were not corrected. It's always boils down to a lack of love, regardless. But I started to talk about timelines. There are certain things that Maria Therese and I, we work up in the same strata where things are orchestrated kind of in the quantum field, and Sarah Adams does this too. We know that certain things are coming in, as Sarah Adams would say, we're creating the architecture for the prolific circulation of joy. There is an architecture that is being constructed in energetic form, and it's solidifying gradually, but we know it's there. So it's in the timeline. The timeline adjustment has to do with, like, certain timelines had to collapse. We've been waiting for certain smaller ones, and some certain major ones that just needed to go. We've been waiting for these to collapse. There was a looping pattern, and I was talking to Kimberly Hall about this, I think for a couple of nights. She can explain that much better than I can. She understands it better. But I know that probably some of you will have noticed there has been a looping pattern. I've noticed this one, where we've been stuck on one timeline, and those of us who have been like in kind of in the lead have been looping and looping and looping in kind of this holding pattern, waiting for some of the bottom strata to kind of catch up, because we do tend to go in groups, in soul groups. We've been waiting for, a lot of us have been waiting for other people. Sometimes you can go up a certain amount by yourself, but there are certain groups who are meant to work together, because that's another thing that happens in, here it is. As we go up, this is the level of, this is the level of individuation. These are all these tiny little dots at the bottom. Like there'd be like hundreds of these little dots. And all the way at the bottom, that's the level of individuation. It's individual, third dimensional existence, and it's very dense because it's very compressed. And there's a belief in separation, belief in isolation. And then as you go up, it gets more spacious, but you gather in groups for teamwork. So up here would be like maybe the fourth dimension. A lot of stuff happens up here. People get organized in and kind of sorted. I've called it Grand Central Station a lot. As your vibration goes up, you kind of your sphere of influence, your energetic field becomes more powerful, and you can affect more. So in essence, you're responsible for more. Your choices will affect the sleepers. You don't have, it doesn't mean that you have to convince them of anything. That's not what I mean. It just means that you radiate a stronger vibrational field, and you will begin to kind of have a stronger influence on the sleepers, basically. I guess I already said it. So by the time you go into the fifth dimension and higher and higher and higher, you're and here's like the 24 strand people. Remember I was saying the 24 strand, some people have 24 strands of active DNA. And then the 48 stranders, we kind of operate up here, and it's like a lot of stuff is being built like seriously built. We've put the architecture in place. The potentials are there. It's solidifying, but we're kind of waiting for everybody to go up to solidify it a little bit more. And this is going to happen in waves. So the first people to go up and spend time there have to be people who are comfortable in a more living in 0 point, because it's not solidified yet, right? So you can't, it takes a certain amount of faith to dwell where there's nothing solid yet. It's going to be solid. And again, it's not an actual space. It becomes kind of dicey to talk about it because it is and it isn't. The world is going to change, and the timelines, the potentials all change too. A lot of people are dropping out as well. It's kind of a fascinating subject. Anyway, where was I going with this? I was going to talk, hang on a second. Whoops. Oh, the timing delay. So it's been very frustrating because Maria Therese and I were talking about this, that we've been so frustrated because both of us have been stuck in this loop where we know we made something. And it's not just us, like we constructed something. We know it's there. It already happened. In the higher timelines, it already happened. And we know other people who saw it. So we come down, it's like, where the fuck is it? Why isn't it here yet? We know we made this thing and it's so much better. You okay, buddy? That's how we feel. It's coming. I promise you it's coming. Kimberly Hall told me last night that there are 3 dates, I can only remember 2 of them. Apparently December of this coming year, December 12th, December 21st, and then there's another one that I don't remember what it is. But it's a set of 3 dates, and supposedly these things that have been set up, we've seen them. It's kind of like waiting for something that, like a building's being constructed and it's set to open these days. So there's going to be a wave of us who are going over, the first wave. And there's been a lot of talk about this for a long time. Okay. So what's the next thing? The thing that they told me I needed to start talking about, I need some sort of assistance in terms of putting this information together. If any of you are interested, I've got a shit ton of information, both about the Joan of Arc lifetime, this lifetime, but it's not only like biographical. And then there's a whole bunch of like pure mechanics of like the way it works. I've got to put that together too. I need some sort of an agent. And I've got pads and pads of these notes, and I've really got to compile it and put together something like a book or a PowerPoint presentation, something like what David Wilcock or David Icke do. You know, PowerPoint presentation. I need to have something like that. So one moment, please. We need to develop the gift of caring for others as ourselves, because the other person is actually an aspect of you. And it's funny because sometimes in the third dimensional paradigm, there's this idea that it's like an abstract idea of the other person as an aspect of you, where it's like singing Kumbaya, like, yeah, you're nice. But there comes a level of awareness where you actually experience that person as the other aspect of you. And when that happens, passing someone who doesn't have a place to live or who doesn't have anything becomes absolutely inconceivable. It's something you can't even imagine. Like just feeding one side of your mouth or just using one of your legs because you don't identify with the other one. You're all one being. So stepping into sovereignty means stepping into kingship or queenship, where this entire place is your responsibility. And you're not going to pass to the next level by only feeding 40% of your population or 80% of your population. You're going to get to the next level of your own development when you have learned to serve and be a wise steward of 100% of your territory. 100% of the people you come in contact with are cared for and thrive. And everyone who comes in contact with you is there for a reason. So it's not like if somebody, my father had a homeless man living on his porch, sleeping on his porch for 5 years. And my father thought that was charitable. I let him sleep on my porch. And I remember thinking, yeah, but you have a guest room. Have you given him a shower? Like switch the roles and see how happy you are. Do you still think it's fair? I use that example in my own life all the time. Switch the roles. Which one has more? If you can't identify inequality, you need to learn before you move up to the next level. Switch the roles. Are you better or worse, or is it actually fair? Are you happy? Are you thriving? If you haven't eaten, if there's some inequality, figure out where the fuck it is and fix it. It is your responsibility. He never actually gave that man, well, I didn't think he gave that man anything. God put that man on his porch. He knew the man's name. Allowing him the privilege of keeping a couple of filthy couch cushions there so he could spend the night on the, so basic, Dad said, I loved my father, but I thought this was atrocious. I really did. My father's dead now. But I remember thinking, Dad said, I let him sleep on my porch, and he hangs out around the house during the day, and he guards basically he makes sure nobody breaks into the house because it was the inner city, Los Angeles. And I remember thinking, so basically you have a human guard dog that you don't even take responsibility for feeding or giving medical care to. Do you invite him in to do his laundry? Do you let him take a shower? Do you invite him for Christmas dinner? You know his name. He used to be a diamond cutter. I don't think that warrants a clap. I think you can do better. I'm not trying to turn it into a shame fest, but there are all kinds of discrepancies. You need to examine, we all do, examine our own behavior for where is the extent, where's your cutoff? And what is the cutoff related to? It's very often, it's often money or awkwardness, social awkwardness. You'd be surprised how often people will defer to what's socially like, it's not appropriate. Why not? At what point does social awkwardness become more important than loving this person? Anyway, so today, oh, that was another thing. Yeah, I do have stuff to say about that. I've been trying to figure out, a way to organize this information because there's so much of it. And it's in a whole bunch of different categories. And I kind of don't know how to organize it without it coming out just plain word vomit, which it basically is anyway. Last thing I'll say on this topic, at least I think maybe so. Recently I went to a family reunion, small one, and we have a member of our family lives far away who's gravely, like very, very, very mentally ill, always has been his entire life. And I had asked after this person, and has a whole host of problems, enormous number of problems. Probably the most troubled person I've ever met. And 3 people, these are family members, 3 people at this family reunion, when I asked, have you heard from Richard? Said, well, his mother pays all his bills. She's paying all his bills. Granted, his mother's 93, but she's still got an income, and she's a lot better off than this person is. I would ask for heightened compassion, because what is he supposed to do? The organizations, so many people, I know this from my own experience, so many people think that there will be some organization, some government agency that will take care of the garbage people. The people that we don't know what to do with, some agency will just take this person and deal with them. Number one, that doesn't happen. These agencies don't, they offer virtually nothing. You want them to, especially the well-off middle-class people tend to think, surely there will be resources available for the people that we don't want to deal with. That doesn't happen. And where they do get services, the services are a pittance. He needs more support, not less. And this is his own family. And of course, his family should support him. Everyone deserves some kind of support. And the one that God puts in your lap is yours. This is your test, your job to extend your compassion or not. But the choice not to do it is going to bear your energetic signature. You just voted. This is what we do with the garbage people. Nobody wants to deal with them. Some agency should take it. Okay. So are you going to step into that role? Or have you discovered the level of your compassion where it ends? And if you've discovered the place where you can't bring yourself to love this thing, you need to know that about yourself. And you've met the level of, you've gone as high as you can go, because this place down here, you know, that I've said this before, you know, that Joseph Campbell quote, take one step toward the gods, they take 10 toward you. That has been true for the period of, there was a period of time and a geometry during which that was true for. It works like there was a mechanism put in place to help humanity, help accelerate the development, because so much of humanity wasn't developing. We weren't gonna make the ascension window with very much of a harvest. So we put certain circumstances in certain mechanisms in place, the ascension arc being one of them, to accelerate the development and give them as much help as possible. And it works a little bit like a moving sidewalk at the airport that only moves when the person walks. Like you take one step and it will move you X amount further. That's going to change, and it's going to switch where that works where like the divine is holding the hand of the infant and kind of pulling them along. But really, that only works for babies. Babies need that. When you go up and you take more responsibility for yourself, you have a greater responsibility for others, unless you don't take it, in which case you're staying in the crib. As you go up, there is a requirement for more service, for more care of others. And until you learn to do that, you stay down here where the babies are. If you're able to take care of one person, you stay down here in singularity. If you're going to take care of just you and yours, you stay down here and basically just take care of you and yours. As you go up, your compassion and your sphere of care for others needs to go up as well. It needs to broaden. It gets wider. So you can say, okay, I'll be responsible for caring for this number and this number and this number and this number and this number. Your compassion, the number of people that you can identify with, you can see yourself in. Whether you like them or not, that's a totally different matter. You can dislike somebody completely and still make sure they're housed and fed, still make sure they're thriving. Do you remember when I said one time that my job in this lifetime is to kind of get the outliers, figure out a way to include all of them, basically all of them. Get the outliers, the prodigies and the really, really slow ones, and figure out a way to bring them into the fold. As we go up, our sphere of influence expands. And so at this point, if I'm working at this level, I'm trying to include this person and this person, or these groups, like the ones at the very, basically the people that don't get included. How do you find a way to get these polar opposites and somehow unite them, expand, make the circle even bigger? So where was I going with this? Yeah, so his mother pays all his bills, as she should. You know why? Because she loves him. Somebody who loves him should pay his bills, because he can't do it for himself. And there's no agency that's going to pick him up either. All right. So I was going, there's a lot of stuff to cover. I was all set to tell you this story about, I guess I'll tell you this story. So, hi, Belinda. Hang on a minute. Sorry. Trying to regroup. I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to tell you the story now, or if I need to do it, if I need to, it's a radical change in subject. All right, I'll tell you the story. They did say that this one has to come, and then I have to start talking about France. That's the thing that really surprised me. But apparently it's something that needs to come out soon. So So I went to college in New Paltz, and there's a story about synchronicity and the way it works. You know, we are, okay, before I tell you this, I'm going to tell you this other one. Because at least it's a good segue. We are the part and parcel of God. We are the body of God. Spirit employs us and orchestrates if we learn to follow. Spirit employs us in part of the grand design, right? In higher dimensions, we live in service all the time. That's all we do is serve. I always feel like I talk about this too much, but then it always comes out. I've said that I'm a 48 strander, and so is Sarah Adams, and so is Maria Therese. And there are other people too, but I just happen to talk to them a lot. All three of us none of us have jobs, but all of us work all the time. We're in constant service. Even at night, we're in service. My greatest joy is to serve God all the time. So there's a mechanism by which this happens. This is also the new model that we're going into. You know, the old model says you work a 9-to-5 job, or you work some sort of job in order to make money to survive. In the fifth dimension, this is a completely different model where you're doing something that you love in service, and you're just giving all the time. You're following your highest joy, but God will use you to provide, to get certain things to wherever it needs to go. When you're living in flow, there's a kind of magic that just happens. So I went to school in New Paltz, and this happened when I was probably, I don't know, maybe 21 or so. I was living in Boughton Hall, wasn't particularly religious, wasn't religious at all, actually. And I had a deep connection with nature. I have always communicated with spirit, always. But I didn't grow up in the church. My mother was a minister's daughter. My father was from a Jewish background, but he was a secular Jew. My grandfather on his side was born Hasidic. And I'm right in the middle of the Judeo-Christian tradition. But I had a stronger interest in it naturally than either one of my parents. But I wasn't raised in a church. I found my own way there, and that's why I think it means so much more to me. Because I have it real strong. At any rate, one time when I was in college, out of the blue, I was an art student, and I really wasn't studying, and it had nothing to do with anything I was studying in college. I just had a sudden desire to go to church and find out about going to church. And my interest in it was really strong all of a sudden. So I decided to find out more about it and about what was available locally. And I didn't know anything about any denominations or what was available, and I had never been raised in a church, so it was kind of an out of the blue thing. So I went to the Student Christian Center, and I was hoping for some kind of guidance, right? And when I got there, basically it was like an empty office, and they had a couple of plastic chairs and a whole bunch of brochures about not having premarital sex. There was nobody there, and when I finally reached somebody, they didn't have any answers. It was basically completely useless. So I took it upon myself. I really I kind of dove into this field of study for a while, and I got a phone book and a notebook, and I made a list. I remember kind of dropping out of classes for a little while too, because I decided that like I was really interested in this, and I stopped going to classes for like maybe 2 weeks, and this became like my full-time endeavor, because when I have an area of interest, I really study it. And I went to the library and I read up on a whole bunch of all the like different denominations, and I got a phone book, and I circled all of the local churches, including the synagogue, everything that could be reached locally by foot or bicycle, because that's what I had. And then I went to all of these places, each and every church. I went there and I made notes. I compiled like this really detailed list of everything about the church. Like the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church, the Methodist Church, the Lutheran Church, the Presbyterians, the Baptists, the Adventists, the synagogue, and I wrote down what the basic tenets, like what are the differences in the denominations. And then I called every last church, and I got in touch with all of these people, talked to the minister or the priest or the rabbi, and I made lists of how easy they were to talk to. I visited all of these churches, and I made all sorts of notes, like this one smells like a rummage sale. They spend a lot of time in the basement. They have a preschool there. They offer a whole bunch of 12-step groups, but nobody talks about God at all. I went to different services, like this one offers bread, no communion wafers. They have a friendly secretary, but I couldn't speak to the minister. Minister was totally unavailable. And so I did this with all of the churches, and then I started getting them kind of confused. I forgot which one was which. So I went back to each one, and since I was an art major, I did a little watercolor of every last one of them, drew little pictures so I could remember this one is the one with big red doors. They don't open it even on Sunday. And then pretty soon I had filled up this entire notebook, and it started to get kind of confusing. So I was an art major. I had this huge pad of paper, and I decided to put it in a chart format instead. So I took everything out of the notebook, and I wound up making this enormous chart, complete with the photographs and the numbers and how to get there, directions and their hours of operation, what the minister's or the priest's name was, their contact information, whether the secretary was nice or not, my impressions of the place, what it smelled like, all kinds of things. It was really, really detailed. How to get there. And then I carted that around with me. I wound up going back to classes. So one day, I was walking to Smiley Art Building, and you know how sometimes you catch somebody's eyes? I caught somebody's eye and she seemed a little lost. And I smiled at her, and she said she had the thickest accent I've ever heard in my life. And I still had no idea what country she was even from. But she said something to the effect of, can you point me to the Student Christian Center? And I said, yeah, it's over there. You go through this parking lot and you go up there and there's a little road. And so I could tell that she was an exchange student and she had just arrived. She told me this. She had no friends, no family. She was all by herself in a foreign country and didn't particularly speak the language all that well. And I could tell she had no idea what I was even saying. So I said, okay, don't worry about it. I'll draw you a little map. So I whip out my notebook and I'm drawing her a map to the Student Christian Center. And as I'm drawing it, she tells me that she's new in the country and she doesn't have friends or family. She's looking for basically, she's looking for some sort of Christian community or church group, whether it's Christian or not. She's looking for a community. So right away, I know that there's nothing that the Student Christian Center is going to do for her because I was just there. But are you in luck? Because I pulled out this big pad and I said, I just happen to have this 24 by 36 inch chart. And it was perfectly obvious that God had used me to compile this thing for her. And I remember pulling this thing out. I was so proud. I was like, look, I have this. And both of us, we stood there. We were like so shocked. There was like this moment of silence. And we both looked at each other. And I don't know who was more surprised, but I pulled it out, I rolled it up and gave it to her. I never saw her again. But it made such an impression on me, and she walked off. And I remember, so this is before I knew anything about synchronicity, long before I knew anything about Joan of Arc by about 25 years. I just remember thinking, I don't know what the fuck that was, but it was the greatest thing. I loved it. Bring me more of that. And the thing I loved about it the most was that I didn't tell her where to go. I didn't tell her what church to go to. It still allows for discovery and her own path. But when God decides to use you for something, it should feel like a joy and it should feel like an inspiration. And I put 2 weeks worth of devoted work into that discovery. I remember when I gave it to her, there was like this little fraction of a moment where I was like sorry to see it leave. Like I wanted that because I already kind of forgot some of the information. Like I wanted that information, but then I was like, well, I can look it up again. Or it's during the time that that I was in service. And so service work should, it doesn't mean that it's drudgery. The best kind of service work is when you're completely jazzed about it all the time. Like, or you do something and it is so, you're in so much flow that it just happens. It's complete magic. My ex-husband, I always think this is such a good example. My ex-husband, when I first met him, he was in college, and when he went to college, when he left home, none of his family were religious at all. He hadn't grown up in a religious home at all. And then he went to college, and his first semester, his whole family became born again Christian. And he came home and he was like, what the fuck happened? And he didn't know whether he believed it or not. He didn't think he did. And one time he tells me this story. I've always liked this story, that when he went home, he was alone in his parents' kitchen. And he was thinking about it, like, what am I, like, all of a sudden my parents believe in God, my sister believes in God, my aunt believes, and everybody is like, God crazy. And he did the kind of like this beginning, you know, when you first, it's I don't want to call it an era, I almost call it a beginner's era, but it's kind of like a beginner's test, a challenge. Like somebody who's not really spiritually awakened will often give God some kind of a test, like, well, if you exist, do this. So he did that. He was in his parents' kitchen, and he said, okay, God, well, if you exist, move this book across the table, is what he said. And nothing happened. So then he's like, all right, well, I guess that's that. And then his sister, I love this story. His sister comes in, walks in the room, says, hi, Mike, and just idly picks up the book, looks at it, glances and tosses it, and it lands exactly in the spot that he had pointed to. And what I love about that is that it's such a perfect example of the way God works, because God will not only, number one, doesn't answer like that, but God will always give you what you asked for plus one, plus some, give you more than you asked for. So not only did the answer from God come, but he also was shown the way it works. So it's not like the book is going to levitate by itself and move like through some sort of invisible tractor beam. We are the body of God. There was a person who was used, who had this inspiration to just pick up the book, look at it, and toss it. There's a fluidity, and it's about when you step into flow, you allow yourself to be used, and you trust that in being in flow, you're going to be used, and you're going to be brought to exactly the right place at exactly the right time, etc. And you're a portion of the magic, but you have to allow that to flow through you. Where else was I going with this? So there was, I was going to talk about that. There's, I can tell that there is topical terrain that I have been avoiding. Even though I've talked about it a little bit in the past, I've been avoiding it. And I can tell, this is the information that, like, yeah, I can feel it moving in. And I keep trying to not talk about it. And I keep trying to, talk about something else that's like more scientific or that's a little bit more mental, because I know I'm going to cry, and it's like, it feels more wobbly to me. So I keep avoiding it all the time. And this is the stuff that they've said, you need to start talking about this. Bleh. And that tells me that I'm being called to expand it outside of my comfort zone, which means I need to do it, right? Because that's what it means. I just know it, which means I need to do it. And there's only so long that you can delay before you really get pushed. And it also means, I'm getting a yes on this. It also means that somebody needs to hear it. There's somebody, I don't know who. I don't need to know who. It's irrelevant. Somebody needs to hear the Joan of Arc material. What the fuck? So hi. Whoa. What? Hang on. What just happened? Oh, what? Hi, loose pig. Just a minute. Loose guinea pig. What are you doing? Hi. Oh, you fell out. You fell out of your tub. Maybe you fell out of my tub because I was just weepy, almost. You knew I needed a cuddle. You jumped out of that tub. That was funny. I'm glad a dog didn't bite you. Okay. So I had a what? Hang on. Yes. Hang on a second. Yeah, apparently somebody needs to hear this. There's hang on a minute, I'm gathering myself for a second. I don't know how to approach this material. I keep wondering if I should, because I know I can already feel it. It takes me into really emotional terrain. I was going to tell you my clay pit story. I had an experience, because we're talking about the way God works and being used for things. And I had probably one of the more profound experiences in my life. So I was Joan of Arc, like for real. But I didn't find out about that identity until 2013, when all my memories came back. But when I was 23, but nonetheless, when I found out about the identity, I hadn't known anything about the Joan of Arc story at all. I'm going to put this pig down 1 second. I'm going to put you down for 1 second. Yes, I am. 1 second. 1 second. I had some, I went to France when I was 23, not knowing anything about Joan of Arc. And I had some experiences there that made no sense to me at the time. They certainly stuck out. A whole slew of things happened to me in France that were things that were so weird and so startling and so inexplainable and rocked my world, and I never forgot them. Like almost everything that happened to me, especially when I was in southern France. I was studying sculpture, figurative sculpture, and it wasn't until I was 45 that the Joan memories came back. And then I suddenly remembered, because I never forgot anything. You know how sometimes like memories fade over time? I remembered so clearly things that happened to me when I was in France and in this lifetime. And once the Joan memories came back, I was like, oh, that's what that was. Now it does make sense. They're like weird things. But I had, well, I'll tell you how, like some funny ones first. One time I went, so I went to study sculpture, and I was there for some months. And it was a structured program, but there were a couple of day trips that they had hired a tour bus for the students. And so I didn't pay any attention like to where we were going, and I didn't know anything about Joan of Arc. So I was just like, got on the bus, and they shuttle you around to, you know, this chateau and that place. And I wasn't paying any attention. I wasn't even looking at the itinerary. They hired a bus, so I got on the bus. And most of the places were fine. I had one place that we went to where I didn't know this at the time, but I had memories come back. I had been held when I was Joan of Arc. They moved me around a lot. Now that my memories have come back, I can look back in this and say I was held there. After I was, anyway, I was held there for a while, stayed there for some time. There was one location that had a long yellow, you know, that beautiful yellow stone, French stone. We went into this chateau that had a long yellow room, and I got visions when I went in there. And I kept seeing a girl with short dark hair coming out of the bedroom, and she was wearing, so it was me, but I didn't know this at the time. I was just seeing it really clearly. And she was wearing a white nightgown, long sleeves, and she handed somebody back a plate of mushrooms. And I saw this thing like 6 times. There was a door, and I kept seeing that over and over. There's a woman who comes to the door, and this girl with dark hair hands back this plate where she's eaten everything else, but she has left the mushrooms, and she hands back the mushrooms. And I was like, what is that, a ghost? But I kept thinking, I said to some of my friends who were at the time, you know, because we traveled there with people, I remember saying, these were real people who lived here. And do you ever wonder if they ate their mushrooms? Do you ever wonder if there was somebody who wouldn't eat their mushrooms? And then I walked to the other end, and there was a wide spiral stairway that went up, unusually wide. You know, some of these European things, like the stairways are really small. This wasn't. This was a really wide stairway, and it went up in a spiral. And I was absolutely fixated on this stairway. And I said to one of my traveling companions, I remember, what a weird thing to say. I said, you would want to ride your horse all the way up at the top, but you would know that there would be no place to turn it around. And then I said, do you ever wonder if there were ever 2 groups of people, one going up and one coming down, and it was too difficult for them to pass, so the one group of people had to go all the way back down to the bottom to allow them to pass before they could go back up? Do you ever wonder if that happened? And I remember my traveling companion saying, no. And I also kept looking around for rabbits. Like, there should be rabbits here. I kept thinking there should be like a rabbit hutch there or something, but there are no rabbit there, but I'm sure that there should be rabbits there. That was so weird. But I've thought back to that yellow room so often. At any rate, that wasn't what I was going to say. I was going to tell you the clay pit story, which really is a pretty neat story. So the way, and somebody needs to hear this. This is what they told me to say today. And it was one of the more profound experiences of my life. And for some reason, I'm like, I don't want to talk about it, but I'll tell you. So while I was studying in France when I was 23 in this lifetime, one of the things they did was in that programs, they housed you for the duration of the study period, they housed you with a local family. So I was staying with a local French family and two or three other people. And one of the people that I was staying with, one of the other students that I was living with, for some reason, do you ever meet people and you just don't like them? For no reason at all. She just really, we rubbed each other the wrong way. We both knew it. It was just somewhat abrasive. Now that my memories have come back, I know it's because she was English when I was Joan of Arc. She was one of the, anyway, she was a sculpture teacher and she was there studying figurative sculpture just like me. But we just didn't like each other. But she had heard that there were natural clay pits, and she was talking about it the entire time. She wanted to go get some yellow clay and try to like build a little kiln and fire it, because that's kind of a neat thing to do. And she kept talking about it the whole time. She was really, really on about it. She really wanted this yellow clay. So about, I don't know, maybe a month and a half into the study period, she said, do you have any interest? Anybody who wants to go to the clay pits, we're going to go this day. We're going to leave early in the morning because it was about a 3-hour bike ride. And she said, we're all going to go and get some clay. And before I tell you the rest, I should tell you that this happened too, because it's pertinent to the story. When we got there for the study period, you were supposed to get a bicycle, and there was a little shop that had rented a certain number of bicycles, and I had paid for a bicycle, and I didn't realize that there was any kind of a selection process. I thought basically all the bicycles were going to be the same, but I let everybody go ahead of me. So like the whole Joan of Arc energy stream delivers certain things. One is like a tremendous amount of sacrifice. Also, the whole idea of a task that is mine and singularity, and a very unwieldy task that's too hard for any one person. Something being too big to manage, but it's like you have to do it anyway. For some reason, it's your job. The whole idea of something masculine and silver, too. There's a sterling silver element in that energy stream as well. And a whole bunch of transgender things, too. At any rate, I didn't know any of this at the time. And when I went to get my bicycle, I let everybody go ahead of me. And by the time I went to get my bicycle, there was only one left. And it was the one that everybody else had rejected, this one bicycle. It was a man's racing bike, and it was for a very, very, very tall man. This bike was huge, and it couldn't be adjusted any lower because I did ask. It was just this really tall bike, and it was a silver man's racing bike. It had a banana, like a lot of the other bicycles had baskets, and they were like touring bikes, and a lot of them had baskets or wide seats, and you had to bike everywhere. Anyway, there was this man's racing bike, and in order to get on it, I had to like really jump And then you had to ride all hunched over, and the seat was really narrow and hard. There was no basket. There was no place to tie anything onto. And it had really narrow tires because it was a racing bike. At any rate, that's the one I got. So she said, I could ride it. It was difficult. It was never comfortable. But I decided that I was going to go to the clay pits with her, and with a number of other people. A whole bunch of us went. And so we took off in the morning, and it was about a 3-hour bike ride. And finally get there, and we go down into the clay pits. And I actually found, this is how I know I had to tell the story this morning, because I was moving some stuff this morning, and these photographs actually fell out of the box. There I am in the clay pit. And those are 2 other people digging up the yellow clay. There's that lady. I didn't like her. At any rate, so we get there, and I had only brought a fanny pack to put, if I took any clay at all. I was only going to take like this little amount. Plus my bicycle had no place to strap it. But she was so ambitious and wanted this clay so badly that she had brought this, a couple of plastic bags and bungee cords. And she was just really, really gung-ho to get this stuff. So we get there, and she digs up all this clay, and she goes to strap it on her bicycle, and the entire basket fell off her bicycle. And I can't remember, there was something else that happened, like everything that could go wrong went wrong with her strapping mechanism, like the bungee cord breaks and her basket falls off. And she was so crushed, because she had no way to carry this stuff. After all that, after biking for 3 hours. So like people were kind of volunteering, but they had already gotten as much clay as they wanted. They came to get clay too. So I felt bad for her. And I said, I'll see what I can do. Give me the plastic bag, and I'll see if I can strap it. Such a me thing to say, Jesus Christ. I'll see if I can strap it to the seat, since it's a banana seat. Anyway, maybe I can kind of straddle it and sit on it. I don't know. We'll see what we can do. So she gave me a couple of bungee cords, and I strapped this thing onto the seat. And it was incredibly heavy and incredibly unwieldy on an already very difficult bicycle. And we had a 3-hour bike ride home. But I said, okay, I'll try it. So we were all about to leave, and I don't know if you can see it. I guess you can, but there was a path to go up. There was a kind of a steep path to get back up to the road. And they all went out first, and like once again, I was last. I was the last one out of the clay pit. I was still in the clay pit, and they had all gone, including the lady whose clay I was carrying. And they all were basically on the road and heading home. And I was struggling with this bicycle because it had really narrow tires, and I couldn't pedal it. It was really hard. So I was on this thing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And it was like I wasn't making any time. Like, this is really difficult. And at that point, I'm alone, and everybody else has gone on ahead, and I'm still at the bottom of the clay pit. So there was one point where my bike got stuck in the clay, and I was on it, and I'm no longer making any progress at all, and it just stops upright. The bicycle is just upright, and I'm hunched over like not making, and there's no more movement. We're just plain stuck in the clay. And I suddenly realized, like, I don't have a chance in hell there's no way in hell I'm getting out of here. It's just, I'm stuck and everybody else is gone. I can't, so I'm going to have to hoist I don't even know how to do this. So I sat back down on the bicycle and I started laughing, except it really kind of wasn't funny. Because I really was stuck and they were all gone and nobody's looking out to see if I'm coming. Basically, I had to catch up with them. And I sat back down and started laughing. And all of a sudden, like, this is a thing. This is true. I know for a fact that what I'm about to tell you happened. I sat back down on the bike and I thought, there's no way I can get out of here. And all of a sudden, something happened that I flew up the hill on the bicycle. And it took about 2.5 seconds. And I took this huge breath in because something lifted me by my ribs. It felt like by my ribs. And it went, like, suddenly just went like that. And I took this huge breath in, you know, the way, like, if you've ever been on an amusement park ride or something where it lifts you up really fast. I took this huge inhalation and all of a sudden I was just at the top of the hill with my bicycle and the clay. And I stood there and I didn't know what to do. I was so shocked. There was no wind. There was no wind whatsoever. If anything, it was, as I remember noticing, that the air felt warm and still and almost like the air was heavy, like it had a charge to it. And at that moment, it was simultaneously like nothing I had ever experienced before in my life. And at the same time, it was so deeply familiar, like, I know this. Like, we've done this before, but not in life. Like, I just recognized it. And it was angelic assistance. I flew up a hill. I actually flew up a hill, but not of my own power. I was lifted. It was so fast. And I was just at the top. And I could suddenly see everybody was down there and like they had stopped for a second and like they were turning around. I was. And I remember pausing and I didn't say anything, like I didn't know what to do. And it took me a few minutes to like get my bearings and like get back on the road. I didn't tell anybody. I was shaken. I was so shaken that I didn't even tell anybody. But it was so deeply memorable. And I know that's true. That happened. There were, and when I was about, well, in about 2013, when the Joan memories came back, all of the stuff that happened in France, all of a sudden it just made sense. Like, oh, that's what that was. I had so many experiences in France that made no sense at the time. I kept having these huge fits of like onslaughts of tears. Like I saw a caterpillar one time and was reduced to just hysterically crying. And the episode with a bush, I saw a bush planted at the troglodyte caves where they had planted a bush above the chimney to diffuse the smoke so that the English armies wouldn't discover where the people were hiding in caves. And I was so moved by that. There were a whole bunch of experiences. And it's one of those things where the same woman, it's so interesting. All my memories from that trip the same woman. They were meant to stick in my head. I know this for a fact. It was one of those things where you remember what you remember for a reason. And your experiences, you meet these experiences, all of them, for a reason. And if something is really memorable to you, it's memorable for a reason. Somebody needs to hear that. The woman that I didn't like, she also told a story. You know how you're just sitting around with a group of people, and she was a sculpture teacher at a college. And the fact that I didn't like her really doesn't matter. But she did tell this story that really stuck in my head. And when the Joan memories came back, I thought, oh, that's why she told that story. If we're talking about synchronicity and being used by God, I'm telling you this story right now because somebody out there needs to hear this. Like, this is how it works. And sometimes babbling isn't just babbling. Somebody needs to hear this for some reason. So maybe it's you. And it's not necessarily even important that I know who I'm talking to. I just know that somebody needs to hear it. This woman, it's also significant that the guinea pig fell out of her tub during this live stream. That's significant too. I'm not entirely sure why. I might get up and turn off this light, on this light. At any rate, she told me this story. She said, as a sculpture teacher, she was teaching welding one time, and she went into, it was in the sculpture studio at her college, and she told us this story, how she had gone into the studio one day, and all her students were working, and she smelled something burning. And so she went around to all of the workstations with all of her students, and she said, something's burning. And it wasn't this person. And she went to the next person, something's burning. No, nothing here. She went to the next person, something's burning. She can smell it. And they couldn't find anything either. She went around to everybody in the classroom, and she could tell something was burning. She had this, that's the point. She had this sense. She can smell it. And she's like, where is it? Where is it? And she's looking all around. So finally, she gets up on a stool, and in the middle of the room, and this is like kind of a Joan of Arc kind of quality too, takes the lead, gets up in a position of authority, and yells at everybody and says, somebody's burning! And one of her students turns around and says, it's you. And behind her, her apron was on fire the whole time. It's like the knot of her apron. So something she was tied to behind her that she could sense, but she needed help identifying it clearly. But it was her the entire time. And the fact that it was behind her. So she told me this story, and I forgot everybody else's stories, but I remembered that one. And then when my Joe memories came back, I'm like, oh, because something behind me is burning too. And it's me. And there's a knot behind me too. It's a big knot that's on fire. And I got to undo that one. So, one other story, for some reason, I think I need to get these out of the way. There's one more. Two more, actually. There was another woman, another student in that same group who I liked very, very much. She was an embodied angelic. She had very, have you ever seen, angelics can look like anything, but you know how certain people are embodied angels, and they really look it too. She had very light blonde hair. She was tall, and she brought her guitar. She was really a wonderful person. I liked her a lot. I forget her name, but she told me this story, told me two stories actually. And again, when I thought back to it, I thought, oh, that's why that stuck out in my mind so much, that like I had to hear that because it's pertinent to me. That's why I remembered it. She told me a story one time. This woman wasn't married, but she said, I was engaged once. She said it was 2 weeks away from my wedding, and I took my guitar into the woods. And she said this woman had had a very interesting history. She was born into a very Christian family, and she and her family would take their guitars and go in the streets and just like sing praises. And she played guitar well. At any rate, it was about 2 weeks before her wedding, and she took her guitar into the woods to sing songs to God. Like that's a pretty cool thing to do. And she told me this story. She said, I was singing to God in the woods, and all of a sudden a man showed up. She said he was the kindest man. And it kind of startled her because he came out of nowhere. She doesn't know where he came from. She said he sat down next to me, and he told me that I wouldn't be getting married. And he said I was meant to do something else, that I wasn't going to be getting married, but my job was to keep singing. And he asked me if I would sing for him. And she said, then he kissed me on the forehead. I remember that part. She said he kissed me on the forehead and asked me if I would sing a song. And she said, so I did. And she said, suddenly I looked up and he was gone. And she didn't know where he went, because it was in the woods, but there was like no place for him to go. He came out of the blue and then he disappeared. And she said she thought he was an angel. I'm sure he probably was. And it turns out she broke off her engagement. So that was one story she told me, and it stuck in my head. And it was only when I found out that I was Joan of Arc that I remember thinking back to that, like, oh, I'm beginning to see a pattern. Like all of these things that the people told me that really stuck in my head were pertinent to the fact that it was me at that juncture, and I had to remember it because of whatever. And the story's not done yet. There was this other thing that she said that was, boy, was this pertinent to the Joan of Arc story. Identity. The other thing she said, she told me this story that she was once part of a dance troupe, and one time there was some kind of a performance where she and about maybe 6 other people, they all had this routine that they'd been practicing. And it came time to their performance, and somehow they realized that they needed to get about 1.5 minutes more out of the performance. So they had to make it longer, and they didn't have anything choreographed for it. They hadn't practiced any of this stuff. So she said, okay, let's do this. This part in the middle, we'll lengthen this part, and in the middle, instead of doing the choreographed dance, we'll make this part all improvisation. So when it gets to this part, we'll just all go off and do our own thing until this part of the music. So this will take up the extra time. So everyone said, all right, we're going to do that. Well, it gets to that part, and she takes off and she starts to do her improvisational dance, and she looks over and everybody else has gone to the sides, and she's the only one dancing. They left her. They left her to do the whole thing herself. And I thought, boy, can I relate to that. That has a lot to do with the Joan of Arc story too. Like, here, I'll go down and lead this army. And everybody else is like, all right, you're the savior figure. We're going to be part of your army until it comes time to, until that one part where we're all going to run inside and pull up the drawbridge and leave you outside. That really happened. I was captured because I was outside the drawbridge. Because I was still fighting. And they pulled up the drawbridge and left me outside with one other person who promptly got shot in the face and killed. But they captured me. Anyway. What else was I going to say? I'm glad to see you all. See, then I have all kinds of things like this that it's not story related. I was going to talk about addictions. All kinds of information comes in, and I just have to find a way to organize it, because some of it is like more or less mechanistic and like more scientific. And then I still don't know what to do about, hi Kimberly. I still don't know what to do about these damn Joan memories, because fuck. Flying up the hill was pretty interesting though. Let's see. What else is here? Nope. One moment. Yeah. Sorry. Now, am I going to talk about this today? So, how many people are on here right now? I did that. Karma. I was thinking about doing a long talk about karma. How are we doing on time? 6:10. One moment, please. All right. Should we keep going or end it? Hi, you guys. How many people we got on here? I was going to talk about the Virgin of Guadalupe and the energy behind that. All right. I feel like I should, I did get my diagrams too. All right. Maybe this could be for next live stream. All right, I guess this has been on. I've been on for a while. I'm going to wind up doing these like I have been in the past couple of days, instead of doing like, you know, for a while I was doing like 4-hour live streams. I'm going to do them more frequently, but shorter like this, because I covered enough. I think that's good. All right. Okay. I guess I'm done for the time being. But I think I might come on and do another one tomorrow, probably. Yeah. All right. I love you. Bye. Oops.